I want to tell you exactly what I saw. But first, I need you to understand what it cost me to stay quiet. By the time the detective opened that folder on his desk, Daniel had already taken 2 years of my life. My job, my best friend, my reputation in a community I'd lived in for 11 years. He had turned every person I trusted into someone who looked at me like I was unraveling. He was very good at what he did. But here's what Daniel never counted on. I was better. I had spent 26 months doing what he thought he had already done to me, disappearing. Quietly. Methodically. Watching. Documenting. Building something he couldn't see coming, because he was so busy watching me fall apart that he never noticed I was putting everything together. The night Claire went missing, I was the only person awake on that street. I saw his car come back. I saw what was on his hands. I never told the police what I actually saw that night, but I did eventually tell them everything else. Stay with me. Because the story of how I did it is the story of how I got every single thing back. Before we go back to the beginning, I want you to know where this story ends. It ends with Daniel in handcuffs. It ends with his name in the local paper, not as a respected business owner, not as the man everyone in our neighborhood called when they needed a favor, but as the man who was arrested on a Tuesday morning while his sprinklers were running. It ends with me standing in the driveway of the house I'd been locked out of my own life in front of, and feeling, for the first time in 2.5 years, like I could breathe. But to understand how we got there, you need to understand 3 things. You need to understand what I actually saw that night, and why I told no one. You need to understand what Daniel did to me when he realized I had seen it. And you need to understand exactly how I built the case that brought him down, not in a courtroom, not with a lawyer, alone in my kitchen, with a laptop and a timeline and the patience of a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose. My name is Linda. I need to take you back to before all of this. Before I knew what kind of person Daniel really was. Before I understood that some people wear the face of a good man so long, they forget there's anything underneath it. I had lived on Sycamore Close for 11 years. I moved there after my divorce, when I needed somewhere that felt steady, somewhere with lights on in the windows at night and neighbors who waved from their driveways. It was the kind of street where people left homemade jam on each other's porches at Christmas and complained about the same pothole for 3 years without ever actually calling the council. I loved it. It was the first place that had felt like home since my marriage ended. Rachel and Daniel lived 4 houses down. I'd known Rachel since university. We weren't close the way some people are. We didn't talk every day, but she was the kind of friend who shows up. When my mother was sick, Rachel drove me to the hospital at 11 at night and sat in the waiting room until 2 in the morning without being asked. She was quiet and steady and deeply good. I knew Daniel through her. And Daniel was, I say this so you understand why none of us saw it. Daniel was the kind of man who made everyone in the room feel like they were the most interesting person he'd ever met. He remembered details. He showed up to neighborhood events. He volunteered for things. He made you feel seen. He had been seeing Claire for 8 months. None of us knew that yet. Claire Harmon was a primary school teacher. She lived 2 streets over, on Birchfield Road. I'd spoken to her maybe a dozen times, At the school summer fair, at the pharmacy, once at the pub quiz Rachel organized every February. She was bright and a little nervous, and she laughed with her whole face. I didn't know her well, but I knew her. The summer before all of this happened was the last summer anything felt ordinary. I remember sitting in Rachel's garden that August, all of us eating cold pasta salad and complaining about the heat. Daniel was refilling glasses. Rachel was laughing at something. The kids from next door were playing in the sprinkler. I remember thinking, this is the good part of life. The quiet, ordinary part. 2 months later, Claire Harmon was missing. And here is the thing I've thought about 1,000 times since. That evening, the last evening in Rachel's garden, I caught Daniel watching Claire's street from the back fence. Just for a moment. He thought no one saw him. I saw him. I didn't know what it meant then. I filed it somewhere in the back of my mind under things that don't make sense yet. That file would get very full. Very quickly. Claire Harmon was reported missing on October 14, 2021. She hadn't shown up to school on Monday morning. Her car was in the driveway. Her phone was off. Her sister, who lived 40 minutes away, had been trying to reach her all weekend. The police came to our street 2 days later. Routine inquiries, they said. Had anyone seen anything unusual in the past week? Did anyone know Miss Harmon well? I told them I'd spoken to her occasionally. I told them nothing unusual had stood out. That was technically true. But it was also a lie I would spend the next 2 years being punished for. Here is what I had not yet told anyone. On the night of October 12th, 2 days before Claire was reported missing, I couldn't sleep. It was just after 2 a.m. I was in my kitchen making tea when I heard a car pull into the street. Not an unusual sound, except that it stopped outside Daniel and Rachel's house instead of continuing to the end of the road. I looked out of the kitchen window. Daniel was getting out of his car. This on its own was nothing. People come home late. But it was the way he moved. He didn't go straight to the front door. He went to the boot of the car. He stood there for a moment, still, very still, and then he walked around to the garden tap and turned it on. And he stood at that tap for a long time, washing his hands. The light from next door's security lamp caught his forearms. There was dark mud, or something, along both of them, up past his elbows. I stood at my kitchen window and watched him wash it off. He looked up once. I stepped back from the window. I told myself it was nothing, that there was an explanation, that people's husbands came home late, covered in mud for completely ordinary reasons. I almost believed it. But 2 weeks later, when the police announced that Claire Harmon's body had been found in Hadley Woods, 4 miles from our street, that night came back to me like a photograph developing in my hands. And then I made the mistake that defined the next 2 years of my life. I went to Rachel. I didn't go to the police. I went to Rachel. Because Rachel was my oldest friend, and because what I had was not proof, it was a memory of a man washing his hands in the dark, and I couldn't do that to someone I loved, on the strength of something I wasn't even sure I'd seen clearly. Rachel listened to everything I said, and then she said, "You were half asleep and looking out of a dark window. You have to be careful about what you think you saw." I believed her. Or I tried to. I let it go. That was my mistake. Not because I was wrong about what I saw, but because Daniel found out I'd told her. And after that, everything changed. He started small, the way people like Daniel always do. A comment here, a look there. He mentioned to a few people on the street that he was worried about me, that I'd been struggling since my divorce. He mentioned that I'd been fixating on things, that I'd come to Rachel with an upsetting story that hadn't held up. It was so subtle, I almost didn't notice it happening. And that's when I found something I wasn't supposed to find. Something that changed everything. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. I want you to understand the full shape of what Daniel did, because it's important that you see it the way I eventually saw it, not as a series of bad things that happened to me, but as a deliberate, calculated campaign. He didn't lose his temper. He didn't threaten me. He dismantled me. Piece by piece. With a smile on his face. It started with my job. I worked in marketing for a regional property firm. Good job. 7 years. I was good at it. What I didn't know at the time was that Daniel sat on the board of a company in acquisition talks with my firm. I found that out much later. In January 2022, 3 months after Claire's body was found, my manager called me into a meeting and said there had been concerns raised about my conduct. Specifically, that I had been sharing confidential client information outside the company. I had not done that, but someone had made it look like I had. I was let go in February. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because at the time, I had no idea this was connected to Daniel. I was just blindsided, humiliated. I spent 3 months trying to figure out what had happened, trying to clear my name, going in circles. The second thing he did was Rachel. In the spring of 2022, Rachel stopped returning my calls. When I finally reached her, she was cool in a way she'd never been before. She said she needed some space, that some things I'd said had made her feel uncomfortable, that she wasn't sure I was being a good friend to her. Later I'd find out what Daniel had been telling her for months, that I was obsessed with him, that I had developed an unhealthy fixation, that I had once made a pass at him at a neighborhood event, and he'd turned me down. And that's where my story about that night had really come from. Every word of it a lie. But Rachel believed him. Because why wouldn't she? He was her husband of 16 years, and I was a divorced woman, who by that point had lost her job and was, objectively, falling apart. The third thing he did was the neighborhood. By mid-2022, I had become, in the eyes of people I'd lived beside for 11 years, unstable, difficult, someone to be managed. People were kind to me the way you're kind to someone fragile. But the invitations stopped. The easy conversations in driveways stopped. The community I'd built my life around quietly contracted around me. And I want to tell you what that felt like, not for sympathy, but because I need you to understand the specific cruelty of what he was doing. He wasn't just taking my job and my friends. He was building a story in which, if I ever went to the police about what I saw that night, I would be the unstable, fired, obsessive woman with a grudge against her former friend's husband. He was laying the groundwork to discredit me. He was making sure that the moment my name was attached to any accusation, the narrative was already in place to destroy it. I understood that in the summer of 2022, and it was the moment I stopped falling apart. I could have walked away. I almost did. But then I thought about everything he'd taken from me, about Claire, about what silence had already cost, and I made a choice. I want to be precise about this, because precision is what saved me. In August 2022, I bought a new laptop, paid cash. I created an email account I'd never used before, and I started building a file. Not a file of feelings, not a file of memories, a file of facts. The first thing I did was go back to October 12th, 2021, and write down everything I remembered. Every detail. The time, the sound of the car, the way he moved, the angle of the security light, the color of what was on his arms. I wrote it as a witness statement, the way I imagined a detective would want it written. Clinical. Sequenced. Specific. Then I went looking for corroboration. There was a woman, I'll call her June, who lived on the corner of Birchfield Road and Hadley Lane. I'd seen her quoted in a local Facebook group once, mentioning she was a light sleeper and often saw early morning traffic from her bedroom window. I knocked on her door. I told her I was doing informal research into the case and that I had reason to believe a vehicle had passed through the junction near her home in the early hours of October 13th. I asked her if she remembered anything. She did. She remembered a dark-colored estate car passing through the junction just after 2 a.m. She hadn't mentioned it to police because she hadn't known the timeline. She hadn't known the woods were down that road. She agreed to make a formal statement if it came to that. That was piece one. The second piece came from a journalist. A local reporter named Sasha had written 2 follow-up articles on Claire's case when the police investigation stalled. I reached out to her anonymously. I told her I had information that might reopen the investigation and that I needed to understand what the current status of the case was. Sasha told me the case was technically still open but had gone quiet. She also told me, in passing, not knowing its significance, that Claire had left her teaching job 6 months before her death following a complaint that had never been fully explained publicly. I already had a suspicion about what that complaint had been, but now I had a direction. I spent the next 4 months filing Freedom of Information requests. I hired a private investigator, a woman, retired police, for 6 weeks to trace Daniel's financial records. What she found was a pattern of payments from a shell account to a firm that didn't appear to exist. Payments that had started 11 months before Claire died and stopped 3 weeks after. That was piece 2. The third piece was an email. I'm not going to tell you how I found it. What I will tell you is that Claire had forwarded a message to her sister the week before she disappeared, that her sister had never shown police because she hadn't understood its significance. The email was from a private account I traced, through patient work, to a device registered to Daniel. It wasn't explicit. It didn't contain a confession. But it contained a threat. I did not go to a random detective with a story that made me sound unstable. I researched who had submitted a formal request to reopen the case. I found Disanita Marsh, who had pushed for a second review 8 months earlier and been overruled. I emailed her office. I said I had new information and would like to bring it in person. She replied within 4 hours. Everything was in place. All I needed was the right moment. And then, Daniel handed it to me. Daniel handed it to me in the worst way he possibly could. He went to Rachel. In September 2023, 2 years after Claire disappeared, he told Rachel that I had been escalating, that I had been in contact with a journalist and a private investigator, and that I was clearly having some kind of breakdown. That he felt threatened, that he was considering a restraining order. He wanted Rachel to call me, to warn me off. Rachel called me. But the call did not go the way Daniel had planned, because Rachel, steady, quiet, deeply good Rachel, had found something of her own. She had found an old phone. One of Daniel's. It had been in a box in the loft that she'd been going through while redecorating. It was locked. She knew his patterns. She got in. And she found the messages between him and Claire. She called me crying. And I said, Rachel, I need you to listen to me very carefully. And then I need you to not touch anything, and to trust me for the next 72 hours. I walked into DC's Anita Marsh's office on a Wednesday morning. I brought 3 things. My file, a printed copy of the threat email with full provenance documentation, and a USB drive containing the financial records my investigator had compiled. I also told her about Rachel and the phone. Anita Marsh was the kind of detective who doesn't react visibly. She read through everything, slowly, while I sat across from her. When she finished, she looked up and said, How long have you been putting this together? I said, 14 months. She said, Why didn't you come sooner? I said, Because you would have dismissed me. And you know it. She didn't argue. A warrant was executed 3 days later. They found trace evidence in Daniel's car, evidence that had not been thoroughly processed 2 years earlier. They found a deleted file on his work laptop containing information about Claire that no innocent person would have reason to hold. He was arrested on a Friday morning while his sprinklers were running. His legal team tried very hard. Daniel's strategy was exactly what I'd predicted. She's unstable. She's obsessed. She has a vendetta. He played the card he'd spent 2 years building. But here's the thing about documented evidence. It doesn't care what you say about the person who found it. June's witness statement stood. The financial records stood. The phone Rachel found stood. The threat email stood. He was charged with Claire Harmon's murder in November 2023. Convicted in March 2024. At sentencing, the prosecutor read out the full timeline of the cover-up, the deliberate destruction of a witness's credibility, the systematic isolation of the one person who had seen him come home that night. The judge called it a calculated and sustained campaign of intimidation against a key witness. His sentence was 22 years. I was in the gallery when they took him out. He looked at me once. I didn't look away. She tried to say something. But there was nothing left to say. The evidence spoke for itself. I want to be honest with you about what came after. Rachel. That's the part that cost the most. Rachel has been through something that I don't have the language for. The man she had built her life around, the man she had defended to my face, had killed someone. had methodically destroyed her oldest friend to protect himself from what that friend had seen. She has children. She has a house with his name on it. She has a decade and a half of a life she now has to make sense of. We are in contact. Carefully. We are rebuilding something. Slowly. Quietly. Imperfectly. It's not what it was. I'm not sure it ever will be. My name was cleared publicly, which should have felt like more than it did. The local paper ran a piece. People on the street said the right things. But I had lost 11 years of easy community in 2 years of calculated destruction, and you can't just get that back with an apology and a newspaper article. I rebuilt. I rebuilt differently. But here is what I know, and what I want you to carry with you. The most dangerous person in your life is not a stranger. It is someone who knows exactly how much you trust them, and banks on that trust to make you doubt yourself. Revenge done right is not loud. It is documented. It is patient. It is a woman at a kitchen table at midnight, cross-referencing financial records, not because she's angry, but because she knows what's true. I didn't just want him to lose. I needed the record to be corrected. Those are very different things. The record is corrected. I want to take you back to the beginning of this story, to that kitchen window at 2 a.m., to the security lamp, to the sound of water running from a garden tap on a quiet street where nothing bad was supposed to happen. I told you at the start, I never told the police what I actually saw that night. And that was true. When the officers came to our street 2 days later, I told them nothing. Because I had nothing that felt like enough. Because I was a woman standing at a dark window in the middle of the night, and I wasn't sure what I'd seen clearly, and I was terrified of destroying an innocent man's life on the strength of a bad feeling. I understand that woman. I don't blame her. But I want to tell you what I wish I had known then. What you see matters. What you know matters. And the moment someone starts working to make you doubt it, to make you smaller, quieter, easier to dismiss, that is not the behavior of an innocent person. That is the behavior of someone who knows exactly what you saw. I did eventually tell the police. I told them everything. Not just what I saw that night. That was one piece of many. I told them what I had spent 14 months building in the silence he had tried to trap me in. He bet on my silence. He forgot that silence is a choice. And I chose differently. Nobody is untouchable when you have documentation, patience, and the absolute clarity that comes from knowing the truth, even when everyone around you has been convinced otherwise. I saw what I saw. I built what I built. And he is exactly where he belongs. I want to ask you something before you go. Have you ever known something, really known it, and been made to feel like you were the problem for knowing it? Had someone slowly, carefully build a version of you in other people's minds that you didn't recognize? Tell me in the comments. Did you stay quiet? Did you find your moment? Or are you still in the middle of it? I read every comment on this channel. You are not alone in this room. Please let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos.